Hey everybody, Nick Blazier here. I'd like to make a video series here introducing newer players to the modern era of backgammon and analysis with the latest and greatest bot called eXtreme Gammon. I get a lot of questions from students starting out looking to study about like where to get this software, how to get started with it, what you can do with it, like what its purpose is. And I'm sure many people watching, like YouTube videos of PR-based competitions and things might be wondering what this whole software side of it is about. And it's a very easy to use tool and just crucial to being able to play the way that people are studying the game now these days. So I just wanted to make some kind of lighter introductions to the features in eXtreme Gammon, hopefully to get some like people interested in backgammon, give them a chance to go download this and feel what the game's about. I've got the website up here. It's just extremegammon.com. You can go download a 14-day trial immediately for your desktop. It's got some recommendations on here. It is a Windows-based application, so if you're trying to use this on Macs or something like that, you'll have to have some sort of Windows emulator. And if somehow you're in the position of thinking about studying backgammon and want to know what kind of computer you would need to run software like this, the main thing that it cares about is CPU. And we'll get to why that is later, but it spends some CPU power to analyze positions, but everything else about it is fairly lightweight. It's not like a very graphical program necessarily, and it's not like it needs a ton of memory to run or anything like that. So get the nicest CPU you can get if you want to run it, and you'll have a little bit more fun with it. But yeah, so you can download there, download your free trial, kind of follow along with this. But then once you get that, the application looks a little bit like this. You'll have to run through a installer and setup, and I would just follow all the prompts there and get where you get. And some of the first things it'll give you are options about the visual layout. So if yours doesn't look quite like this, it's probably because in the, where do I find this? In the board configuration, one of the first things I always go to do is change it to a two-dimensional board, just because I find it easier to look at, to play with, to see the board. But I think it might set up something like this 3D board by default where you get a view with graphics like this and you can have hands reaching out and visualizations of the dice dancing around and things like that. Maybe if you're into that, you can set it up that way, but I find it a lot easier to deal with in this 2D configuration. So, I don't know, whatever you like with that, you can get all kinds of fancy things to make the board look however you like. There are people in the community that make skins for this to make it like different board configurations to match maybe the board that you play on or something you've seen in a tournament. But anyway, this main screen that we're looking at, what we're looking at is file new a setup position. And so we'll talk about a little bit about this to begin with. But you can see there's some other options in Extreme Gammon too, which are to play a match against another human on the same computer or against the actual analysis software on different levels. Or you can play unlimited games, so a match is some number of points. This is just an unlimited session. Or you can actually do game transcriptions. You can enter moves as you go along from someone's live match or from a recording and get them all into Extreme Gammon that way and get an analysis of your entire match. So those are kind of the core features of Extreme Gammon. And setup position is kind of the core feature of all of those in a sense. What that allows you to do, we're in setup position mode right now. It allows you to choose your game type, whether you're playing some unlimited session or if you're playing a match to some score, and then there's some score that you want to set up in there. You can ask it about checker play decisions down here, or you can change to the double action, or the take action as well. So assuming the double, what's the correct action there? And we have little buttons here to clear the entire board if we want. And then if you hit that again, it actually brings the whole board back, which can be very useful. We have this change active player. So right now, white's on roll if I want a decision from black's perspective. Maybe you're setting up from a photo or something where the decision's on the top side of the board, so that can be useful as well. But then it's basically like a click and drag interface from here, and I can construct any backgammon position I like by clicking through to whatever dice roll I like and adjusting the checkers. Adjusting the checkers, you just so it's if I take entirely off the board here, my left mouse click is going to put white checkers on the board, and my right mouse click is going to put black checkers on the board. So it's easy to set this whole position up backwards as you're getting used to it and things like that. So kind of better to start from the position and move checkers around if you can remember to do it that way. But there's some easy features like if I left click on this black stack, then it's going to get rid of it. And if I right click somewhere down the stack, like on the third checker, it's going to take everything off to that point. If I click above, it'll put more checkers back. So it gets pretty intuitive to move things around and set up a position as you like. And the main thing that we have going in this analysis software is that we can get positions in, and our opponent's done some things too, whatever. And we have something like a 5-4 to play, and we can go over here and hit one of the analysis levels to give us what the artificial intelligence thinks we should do with this move. So right now it's the notation that it shows us is 13 to 9, 13 to 8. So that means that it's going to play one checker from the 13 point down to the 9 point and one from the 13 to the 8 point. We can also use some of the visualization features over here to show the arrows. We'll put that onto the board to show us what the play it suggests looks like. And if we click on another play, it'll show that. The green color indicating like some error level, an error of some sort, and red, a blunder is the terminology. I'll get to that in a second, what the difference is. But it colors the arrows for that too. And the last thing we can look at is if we want to just visualize what the position looks like after the suggested play, we can look at this final radio button down here too. And this shows us the position after we've played the 13 to 9, 13 to 8. So at the lightest level, it tells us, just, or yeah, at the very least, the general idea is that the software is telling you what move it would make. And if you play against it, it's just going to choose one of those and play that against you too. Um, but what it also tells us is a ton of data, as you can see over in this window, about the plays as well. And the first thing we'll notice here that I have to explain a little bit is this plus 0.335. And so XG's eXtreme Gammon goes by XG for short. Its main language is equity, of course. I mean, I guess, of course, because it is an equity-based game with probability. So I switched it to unlimited games just to look at that to see if it's more, I don't know, maybe it's more normal in some way. I'm just playing around. But so the idea of equity is if unlimited games are saying we're just playing a session where we get 1 point if we win, 2 points for a gammon, 3 for a backgammon, and there's like the cube might turn at some point. And so it's always going, the equity, if we're playing for like a point at stake, whatever a point's worth, the equity is telling us that this position after this play is worth 0.325 points, basically. So like a completely one position, I mean, maybe we can show that real quick actually, is from here, the equity of a position like this is 1, just 1 point, right? And we know the rules with gammons and backgammons and things like that too. So if instead our opponent has all their checkers here and we're clearly going to win a gammon, then the equity is 2 points. And you might be asking, well, the cube's on 2, so isn't it 4 points? Well, it's always going to normalize the equity down to a scale of 1, 2, and 3. So it doesn't want to like be confusing with this number being much greater based on the cube level. It's always going to, so I can change it to 4, so going to be plus 2. If I had a centered cube with no Jacobi rule, pretend like you know what the Jacobi rule is for a minute. Explain this. But so it's always, you can see, it's always normalizing the equity to 2. And I mean, last but not least, if I still have checkers back in the home board for a backgammon or whatever, then we'll see it'll be an equity of 3, right? So this is how many points a position is worth after a play. That's entirely what the equity is. It's a lot easier to visualize in a position like this where it's 1 and we're clearly winning our 3 points for a backgammon. But it can be a little more challenging in the position we showed a moment ago, where maybe we've made some developments and I don't know, sure, and we have a 5-4 to play now. We'll bring the cube back over here too. Sorry. I keep hitting plus plus. I should explain what that is too. But so in this one, this is actually a really neat position that I seem to have constructed here. So it's saying this is worth 0.004 points for white after the play. So this is almost worth like a perfectly even position, is what eXtreme Gammon is telling us after this. And if we make a slightly worse play, then we're like, instead of being 4/1000ths of a point better on average, we're going to be 15 thousandths of a point worse if we find this second best play. But yeah, so this is the speak of equity. If we played this game out infinite times after this with perfect play, then on average, 4 out of 1,000 games we'd win an extra point or something like this, right? Is however you want to think about equity that way. And it's not a direct calculation of wins and losses is the thing, because there's this problem of the cube, right? Dirk gets into a lot of these kinds of things in his book, The Theory of Backgammon. Maybe these videos will be like a lighter version of that book in a way. Everything you needed to know before that book about working with eXtreme Gammon. But yeah, I hope that helps with equity. You know, ask me any questions you have about that, and I can explain that further. But I also have a feature set on here where if I right click, I see down here I have this display winning percentage as, and let me actually raise this up a little bit so you can actually see that whole menu too. This display winning percentage as, when you first install the program, it's going to be on graphic bars like this. I don't really know what these graphic bars are good for. So one of the first things I always recommend is going display winning percentage as and values. I right clicked on the analysis and went here. And then what I get here is this P for like player on roll, and the O is for opponent. So from White's perspective after the play, White, it's telling us, is winning 50% of games. 15.1% of games will end in White winning a gammon, and 0.8% of games will end in White winning a backgammon. And then on the opponent's side, 50% of games are won by them, 15% of games are winning a gammon, and 0.6 are winning a backgammon. So this breakdown can help you understand why the equity is what it is. In a lot of cases, sometimes we might have a decision between making like a high wins and low gammons kind of play versus a high gammons and riskier play. And we can see how they add up to different equities by kind of merging those together in a way. But so this breakdown of numbers can help us understand that quite a bit. Now, the first time I ran a position, I clicked on this two ply button all the way on the left. The two red bars mean two ply. So what this software is it's built on neural network technology. So a neural network can evaluate this position and positions ahead to try to figure out what's going on and what the best answer is. And so when you click two ply, that means that it's looking at, I mean, in rough terms, this position and the next position. There might actually include cube actions in there or something like that too, but in order to not confuse it, I'll just pretend like it's our turn and then our opponent's turn, and those are all lumped together because it's good enough for what we're talking about. But so two ply is just a low level of analysis. That means that it requires a lot less CPU to figure out, and it'll get that answer back quicker. And you can see that XG always likes to put the highest level of analysis on top in the list and not necessarily the best play. It'll mark it as, okay, this play is 0.053 millipoints better, but I analyzed it on a lower setting, and so it doesn't count as much as the one that I analyzed on a higher setting. So if you mess around with the analysis settings on multiple plays, that's a thing that can happen. But all the way on left, we have two ply that, again, that's only looking at this move and the next move. And so when we get up to three ply, that's like this move, next move, our next roll. And then we get up to four ply, it's looking all the way to our opponent's next turn. So the plies are kind of the simplest neural network way to understand what the software is doing. It's just looking ahead a couple rolls. And of course, because the dice could be anything, it has to imagine a combination of all possible rolls and average out what's going to happen with all those and take some guess at the cumulative equity of that afterward, like do a math equation on its own. So you can imagine in Backgammon and in software for it that every ply ahead that we look requires a lot more computing power. And so in general, when you run something on 2-ply, it comes back very quickly. But if instead we remove the analysis again and run it on 4-ply, I mean, my computer is fast enough that I don't see any difference. But you might notice that playing against the computer, that 4-ply takes up a little more resources and takes a little bit longer. And even when we run it on 4-ply, we can see to get a faster answer back that actually, oh, let me center this too while I'm doing it. Beautiful. There we go. We can see that it actually casts off some. So it ran 4-ply on these top 3 candidates, but we can see down here there's only one of them that got ran on 3-ply, and the rest are on 2-ply. So to keep it faster, it actually still runs it on the lower plys first and tries to eliminate some plays and figure out how to get there. I'm getting into the weeds a little bit on what's going on. But in case you're wondering about all these symbols on the left and what level of accuracy and whether to trust the analysis, that's in a nutshell what's going on with all these ply levels. And now this plus and this plus plus, these take a little bit longer to run. And what they are is instead of just asking the neural network what its estimation of the cumulative equities is for a couple rolls in advance, the plus and plus plus will actually execute a short rollout. What that means is that we can bring up, yeah, so it tells us a little bit about it too. Um, yeah. So what it does is it's got the same thing where it's gonna only like finally run plus plus on the top candidates and use the ply system to reduce some options as it goes. But it's going to run a small rollout. A rollout is when XG actually plays the game out to completion a few times. I think it's a few hundred times that it does it on this setting. It does it at a relatively low ply level for all the decisions along the way. But yeah, it's just going to actually play the game out and get a sample size of data and try to get some idea of what the position's worth that way instead of just relying on the neural network output of what it's worth. So it should give us a little bit better answer in general, but it just takes longer to do because it has to actually play the game out a number of times to figure that out. And once we have it plus plus, it comes back very quickly because it can store in memory the results of the rollout. But when we're asking the CPU to do that, it takes a little bit longer. Um, yeah, so that's what all these analysis levels are about here. If your computer can handle it, I would just always use plus plus. If it's too slow, then use some lower level. And you will find that the vast majority of the time, the plays aren't so different between them. And if they are, it's by a small-ish equity difference, which I'll define in a second here too. But yeah, if you're running this on a computer that has enough CPU to handle 4-ply, 3-ply, but not the plus plus, then just use that, and you're still going to get really good feedback from the bot. So yeah, that's an option too. Now, what is a small difference in equity between these plays? So it's defined actually in the settings, and there's some standard verbiage on it or like standard settings, but you can call it whatever you want. You can configure what plays show up as green and what plays show up as red. But in the community, we tend to consider 0.020 or less of a difference as like I don't know what to call it, not an error, but like a potential inaccuracy. Or I mean, the software is only so good, and there isn't like 100% certainty that this is clearly a best play and that this is clearly second best. It's just coming up with this equity difference in its rollout, and so it coming back in black and not like highlighted as a different color is an indication of the level of certainty, if you will. And you can adjust this so that XG reports back like a color on even plays that are close like this. But it's good to know that that 0.02 and less is considered pretty close in equity in plays when you're analyzing your games. The thing about it though is that it's not always like apples to apples. There can be positions where there's a clearly better or worse play, but your chances of anything good happening are so small that the equity difference is very little, and so it also measures on like the importance of your decision in a way that way. And there's other ones where like a seemingly close play can be a huge magnitude in equity because I don't know because we're right at this 50-50 game kind of thing. So it's not always a perfect indication of your understanding of backgammon, but it is, in the long run, what Extreme Gammon thinks the decision is worth. Generally, between zero point zero 0.02 and zero point zero 0.08 is considered a mistake, but like an error and not a giant mistake. And so 0.043, maybe when someone's studying using this, they'll want to figure this out, but this is somewhat close and they're not like too concerned with it. And the red is saved for what they call blunders in the community. So these are 0.080 in equity and higher, and they represent pretty big significant differences in like winning chances in your equity of position. And so we can see here this minus 0.148. I mean, that's indicating that the position's worth 0.148 of a point less after your decision. So you're giving up like 15% of a point almost. I don't know. Percentages isn't the right way to think about it because it doesn't. You can see I actually win the game 4.3% less of the time after this play by these numbers here than I do in the other one. But the equity is just 0.148 less points if you want to think of it that way. So it's some fraction of the 1 point in general spectrum, which can go higher if you're winning Gabbins. But that's what this equity here is, and that's what the difference is. And we're measuring how much we're giving up by making this decision as opposed to the best one. And so we're kind of like handing back a position that's worth 0.148 points more on average for our opponent. And yeah, so this is Extreme Gammon. It's a tool that allows you to take any position, put it in, and get feedback from the engine about what the best play, what the best decision would be, all these kinds of things. If we're playing with the cube as well, we can ask it about cube decisions too. So maybe something like this. I don't know if this is, I'm not thinking about backgammon right now. I'm just thinking about the software a little bit. So if we wanted to know if this was something that I should double or not, XG will give us feedback on that too. And the equity numbers are a little more confusing in this, so it's worth talking about with the cube. What it's going to show us in this left column here is our equity if we don't double, which is 0.509, and our equity after we double if our opponent takes, which is 0.415, less than not doubling. And so that's why it's telling us over here that it's a mistake of 0.094 to double. We give up this much equity if we double and our opponent takes. However, if we double and our opponent passes, well, then we win exactly 1 point, right? That's the 1.0 of equity again. And so we gain almost half a point of equity if we double and get them to pass. And so it tells us overall the best choice is not to double and for our opponent to take. And this best choice down here is a little factoid, which is if our opponent may pass this, this is how often we need them to pass it when we double for it to be worth doubling anyway. For us to make up this 0.094 equity loss on takes, how that balances out with the 0.491 that we gain when they pass. So equities over here on the left, equities on the right. What I think gets confusing to a lot of people is like how and why the equity changes when we send the cube. It might seem like if our equity with a centered cube is 0.509, like when we send the cube over, shouldn't it just double that and then we should be at 1 point something? Well, in backgammon, the cube is worth something. When you send the cube, your opponent is the one that owns it for the rest of the game, and they're the only ones that can send it back to claim, and they get to sit on it. And so ownership of the cube for the duration of a game is worth something in this game. And so what we're seeing basically, what this is actually indicating is that if the cube were already on the opponent's side, well, this is only worth like 0.207 to us then. So it's worth a full almost zero point 0.3 points less, normalized when we send this over. But of course, we're doubling the stakes, so we gain something there. So if we looked at it as though we were doubling with it on the other side, you can see there's that 0.207 number I was talking about. If you put the cube on the other side and ask it to evaluate, XG will still do that. We'll still spit out numbers, but it'll also tell you that it's an invalid cube location for considering a doubling action. But it can be useful for things like this, like confirming the cube full equity, if it's on our opponent's side, like I was saying, which normalizes that 0.207. I hope that's making sense there. The other thing we can do up here, up top, it shows us if there wasn't a cube involved in the game, if neither side could potentially win the game with the cube later, then this is the equity up here. When we don't double, it would be 0.361, and when we do, it would be 0.707. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure why those aren't exactly two times each other. That's funny. I guess Jacobi rule and Gammons come in or something like this. Yeah, that must be part of it. Let me look at it over here. Is it double each other? Yeah, okay, now it's double each other because we have Gammons active. That's funny. I'd never looked at that before. Sometimes I learn things in my videos too. But yeah, so when you run that, the other thing we can do is click on here. We can see it highlights up here that the winning chances when we don't double are listed right now. And it shows us that white wins 59.7 with gammons and backgammons. But we can click it, and after we do this, after we send the cube, the checker play might change a little bit, and whether or not we're going to cash is going to change. And so these numbers actually are going to change a little bit too. And so we can see if they're without doubling, these are the likely winning percentages in gammons and backgammons. But when we double, our wins actually go up some, our gammons go down a little bit. Things might change a little bit. And so you can look to see what the numbers are depending on the scenario that you're choosing with the cube too, because they might be a little bit different. Not always super important, but that's what clicking on this is telling us in case the numbers don't add up in some way you're trying to figure out there. But yeah, in a nutshell, this is like the core use case of this software, I would say, is that we can take pictures of positions or enter things from a match we watched, anything like that, put it onto this computer screen board, and click one of these analysis levels and find out what eXtreme Gammon thinks is the answer, by how much equity it thinks that's correct, and if your play was on the list, how much you gave up by making that, and you can look into it for details too about why exactly was it such a bad play. That's because it, like, how much less does it win? Does it win more gammons if I thought something like this? And you can get a lot of feedback about your play, versus what the neural network would have done. So yeah, I think I'll cut this one off at that, and we'll talk about some other features and use cases of the software from here. But yeah, this is an introduction to equity and position analysis and eXtreme Gammon and kind of the modern approach to thinking about backgammon and studying it, and and the reference tool that we're all going to when we talk about plays being right or wrong or what the right idea is. So hope that helps out, and I'll be back with more soon. Thanks. Bye, everybody.